I want to introduce y'all to Amy Brinkley, who's going to be doing our presentation today. And if you have people who are kind of like, I don't know if I'm going to be here today, or like counterparts, I would highly encourage y'all have them come in. Amy is a person that is fairly well known on the national scale. She is in Indiana and has her own small nonprofit and is just somebody who's done a lot of different advocacy, creating partnerships, and currently works with supporting the state peer organization, not organizational, but state peer leadership. And she can explain what she does a lot better than I can. So I am going to let her introduce herself as well. But I'm really, really glad that Amy's willing and available to be here.
Thank you, Jessie. But I'm super excited to be here, you guys. I've known Jessie now for a couple of years. I actually met Jessie for the first time when I went to the national space, which is a little, well, about 2.5 years ago now. I was going to say a little over 2 years, but time is flying by. So I'm going to share a little bit about who I am and what I do and how I got here. But first, I just wanted to let you guys know, I was sharing with Jessie and Julie before you guys all joined, is that I was actually glad to be working on this particular PowerPoint too, because I'm going through some of my own stuff. And so like, just by virtue of trying to put together this PowerPoint, I was able to see and remind myself of a lot of things, some of which I've told other people. And now I just need to shut up and walk the talk. And I'll share a little bit about that as we go along here. But for starters, Amy Brinkley, I live in Lafayette, Indiana. I'm a person in long-term mental health and substance use recovery. And I worked as a certified peer. Well, actually, I'll go there in a second. Let me finish my title. So I currently am executive director for a local peer-run nonprofit in Indiana, and it's called Paul's Plan Ministries. I've lost 3 brothers to suicide and my mom to an overdose, and Paul's Plan Ministries is about helping people transition from the criminal justice system back into the community. And one of my brothers had actually taken his life 5 days post-incarceration. So this is just it's a heart advocacy project for me. And so we are a formal nonprofit and we are a certified RCO in our state. I also have the title of Senior Recovery Support Systems Coordinator, which Jessie talked about a little bit. While in Indiana, a few years after my peer certification, I went to work for the State Division of Mental Health and Addiction, overseeing our peer recovery support services for the entire state. I was there for about 5 years, and then 2.5 years ago, I took a national position helping other state offices of recovery build infrastructure for recovery support services. So I've got a little bit of that lens too, which you'll probably hear coming throughout our talk today. And then most recently, I've been on the NAMI National Board of Directors now for about 2 years, and I got my start in the peer space through NAMI, my local NAMI chapter. So I became a certified peer, couldn't get a job, but then my local NAMI let me volunteer, and then I started taking classes, and I started leading support groups, and then I was trained as a trained trainer. So then I started training others, and so that's kind of been part of my pathway. So 2 years ago, I was voted onto NAMI National Board of Directors, and then a couple months ago, this is my last board year, I was elected as secretary. So that's kind of a big title, but just trying to end my board time on a good note. And so I wanted to share my career pathway. I don't know, I feel like from what Jessie said, it sounds like you guys have already had some interactions. You guys kind of know each other. So I figured I would start a little bit by just kind of leveling a little bit about myself and sharing myself with you. So I was trained and certified as a peer in the state of Indiana in 2015. That same year, I signed up to be a trainer, and I ended up contracting with the state to provide training for the certified peers, for the peer certification. And then like I said, I couldn't get a job because I had a felony background, and so nobody would hire me. I actually got certified as a peer while still in the custody of the Indiana Department of Corrections while I was at work release. So I got certified while I was still attached to the criminal justice system, but just couldn't seem to get a job. So NAMI was the facilitator for me, if you will, of staying in this space and not drifting too far, because I was able to still use my peer certification and my training and provide peer support to others long enough until I got a paid position, which the first paid position was a contractor for the state. And then the second paid position was working for a community mental health center in Gary, Indiana. And I was a wraparound parent peer support provider. So I worked there for about 2 years before I went on to the Indiana Division of Mental Health and Addictions at the state, overseeing peer recovery support services. And then, like I said already, I ended up moving to the national level about 2.5 years ago. The one thing I want to say about the state is, let me go back. One thing I want to say about this state is that when I started working in state government, overseeing peer recovery support services for the state, I had about a $750,000 budget, and I was an office of one, and I had like maybe 3 or 4 contracts. We did not have any peer organizations. We did not have certified recovery community organizations. We didn't really have anything. We had a certified peer support program where was one contract, and we paid one contract vendor to provide the training and continuing education units and keep track of everything. That was it. And so when I left state government 2.5 years ago, we were at just over $10 million and almost 30 recovery community organizations in the state. And we developed the peer recovery community organization certification for the state. So now certified RCOs can actually tap into additional funds through the state, through our general revenue, through block grant, through several different avenues because of the partnerships we developed while I was in state government, and then just through contracts and spending money. And I was really good at spending money. So while I was in that position, I did everything I could to identify every funding stream I could find and then throw it at recovery. And so we did some really cool stuff. So that's who I am in a nutshell. It was when Jesse brought this topic to me and this idea of coming and chatting with you guys today, you know, the 3 things that were posed to me were they wanted me to talk about what peer organizations need to know. She wanted me to talk about how to leverage partnerships for funding and or advocacy, and then best practices and traps to avoid. So I was sitting here, you know, for a few weeks now, actually trying to think about where to go with this presentation. And this is where I've landed. I'm just going to do what I do best, and that's share from personal lived experience. And I'll just do my best to tie it back to the topic at hand. I do think I have some experience. I wouldn't necessarily label it as expertise yet, but some people may. But I do have a lot of experience with building partnerships. That's one of the things I'm really good at, actually. So I pulled this from the survey that Jesse said was sent to you guys. So these are your guys' responses. So this is the things that came back from the survey. You guys talked about things you want to know. You wanted to know about building strategic partnerships with diverse entities. The top one was developing written agreements. So I went ahead and threw in some MOU work into the slide deck, and then evaluating partnerships, creating partnerships that are aligned with organization goals, values, visions, and mission. So we're going to talk about, I think, just about all of this here in the next few hours. And I promise you, we are going to talk. I'm not just going to talk at you the whole time, but I do have a couple slides I wanted to get through. But I am looking forward to the dialogue. So in the survey that was shared with me that you guys responded to, some of the things that you guys talked about that were your organization's strengths were lived experience and authenticity. And I can't say enough how much I agree with that. And then the peer-led approach, comprehensive support programs was something that one of the organizations mentioned. And then somebody said our board knows people associated with different agencies, experience in the nonprofit sector, and recovery-oriented services. Have you guys, Jesse, have they seen this before, or is this the first time?
Your slides?
Yeah, the results of the survey.
Oh, results of the survey. No, this is the first time still. Yeah.
Okay. So these are your guys' responses to the questions that I just wanted to kind of highlight as we get ready to kick off here. So when you were asked what are ways your organization may need to grow when it comes to building partnerships, one person talked about we collaborate a lot but need to learn to build better relationships with elected officials. One person said diversity. Somebody else said expanding our network. We need to build relationships with a broader range of stakeholders. We're going to talk a lot about today. One thing that was in this section that I'm just seeing, and I wish I can talk more about, but I didn't necessarily put it into the slide deck, is data sharing and collaboration, because typically with data, you want to have a data sharing agreement and or a contract of some sort, because you want to make sure that the data that you're sharing is only used in the way that you release it to be used. But we'll talk a little bit about data, but not necessarily so much about that, but I might have some ideas about that. And then you talked about needing to build partnerships with other agencies and learning how to initiate and develop partnerships. And I loved this last one, the need to reach beyond the usual suspects. I can't say how much I like that one enough. And I think that's going to be reflected through what we talk about today. So you were asked, what do you hope to learn during this course about building partnerships? And you guys said, I want to learn how to get my employees to get better at building relationships with the people they interact with. And how do I get them to see how vital it is for our organization? We talk about it and even have an outreach coordinator who only outreaches to people she knows. How often does that happen, right? I feel like we are creatures of comfort. We tend to own, birds of a feather flock together, they say, right? So it's not always easy or natural for us to get out of our comfort zone and like be uncomfortable. Like the best thing I ever learned from my first sponsor is she said, learn to be comfortable while being uncomfortable. But if that's not something that I'm intentionally trying to do, I don't think about it. So it's almost like an autopilot and I'm just doing what I know to do. And then ways to, someone else said how to best complement each other, ways to build stronger lasting relationships, how to initiate and cultivate effective partnerships. I'm really hopeful that we are going to get into all of that today. So state perspective, I'm going to share from the way I decided to break up the slides is I want to share from a state perspective because I had that lens. And then I want to share a little bit from the local perspective because like Jesse said, I also have that lens. So I'm working at the national level now. I worked in state government for 5 years, but I've also got my own local nonprofit that we've been trying to we are standing up, and we are about 2 years in, and we've gotten several grants. We've been as successful as I can handle right now without quitting my day job. So we've got some, we'll talk about this through both lenses. So in my state role, we were able to accomplish a lot. Like I said, I went from a $750,000 budget and 2 or 3 contracts to just over $10 million per fiscal year, my last year in state government, and almost 20 contracts. So we did a lot of things, and that involved a lot of partnerships. So we started Oxford houses, we started our regional recovery hubs, which are now our certified recovery community organizations. We launched the recovery cafes, we piloted it, and now we have, I think, almost 15. We increased our peer workforce by 3 times the number of peers that we had before. We just did a lot of really cool stuff, but none of it happened without strategic partnerships. And I'll be honest, working in state government, I would get enough, I got enough pitches to last me a lifetime, right? Like there was never any shortage of people coming to me with new ideas and new funding ideas. So there was never any shortage of that. But when I heard about the recovery cafes, I was very intrigued, and I was intrigued enough to ask them to come and do a presentation to our state partners within my office, and the state partners liked it enough that we ended up taking a trip all the way to Seattle to see the model and see if it was going to be a good fit for our state. And that's literally what ended up knocking the door open for everything else that we ended up doing. So the pilot of the recovery cafes is what literally opened the floodgates for Indiana to develop recovery infrastructure in a way that we have never done and we had never focused on before. And it also opened the floodgates for funding. Indiana is not as big as Texas. So I do want to note that. I talk about it like, oh, $10 million is so much money. I know it's not a lot of money to people in Texas, but in Indiana, this was a lot of money. And we're in I live in a very conservative environment. So getting the state partners to agree to spend money on things like this was unheard of. So it was a pretty big deal for us, and it's literally transformed our system. So when I started in state government, one of the things that I didn't like was that I was an office of one, and I was expected to build all of these relationships, and I was expected to be the one that oversaw all of our peer recovery support services. And then I was also expected to be the only lived experience token, if you will. It was very tokenistic. I was supposed to be the only person with direct lived experience in our office representing people with direct lived experience. I don't have everybody else's lived experience. I have my own limited lived experience. And so I made it my mission to figure out how to build partnerships and leverage existing infrastructures so that the state office could hear from the field collectively and not just Amy's experience. So we started, when I started, we started with some very clear silos. From 2008 until 2019, we had two advisory groups that actually three advisory groups that we primarily leaned on as the state office. And that was the Indiana Recovery Council, which was a council of consumers of both mental health and substance use recovery. And they were supposed to be advisors to the state. And then we also had our recovery support work group, which was a smaller group of different state agency partners that actually, I don't even know what they did before I got there, because we ended up ramping it up because they didn't even know what they were doing. Like, we just kept going to these meetings and nobody seemed to know why we were at these meetings. And then we have our mental health and addiction planning and advisory council, which is essentially our block grant planning advisory board, which every state who receives block grant has. There has to be a planning and advisory council for block grant spending. So from 2019 till 2021, we just started to coordinate efforts slowly through collaboration and intentional focus on all initiatives between the IRC, the RSW, and MAPAC. And I'm going to share a little bit about what that meant and what that looks like. So I already talked about this. The Indiana Recovery Council is 16 individuals who identify as being in mental health and substance use recovery. It's been established since 2004. They have their own bylaws. They report directly to the state's commissioner. So that process has been in place for a really long time. The second group that kind of became our ROSC, which I saw in your guys' previous presentation, you covered that already too. The recovery support work group, we ended up kind of turning into a ROSC. And so the recovery support work group is made up of more than a dozen state agencies, community and statewide stakeholders, and more than 51% of people with direct lived experience. What the recovery support work group does is it uses recovery data to validate the lived experience feedback from the Indiana Recovery Council to inform our state division of mental health and addiction for funding, policy, and programs. So I think I have a visual in here. This is the summary version. So we contracted out to have a quality improvement group come in and help us to coordinate this. So there's a whole process behind this. But essentially, the way it ended up being is we created a three-step process where the Indiana Recovery Council identifies lived experience, gaps, and needs for recovery support services across the state. So this is the people with mental health and substance use recovery on the IRC creating an annual survey, identifying what the needs are for people across our state who live with mental health and substance use challenges, so across the gate. And so they've got that annual survey, and we're going to talk about that briefly. So the IRC identifies the gaps. The recovery support work group, which is made up of multiple state agencies and people with direct lived experience, are tasked with finding solutions. So the states and the interstate agency partnerships that we develop, they have funding. The question is, we needed to get them on board and caring about what we care about so that they start allocating funding to what we know that the funding needs, where the funding needs to go. So the RSW's job was to make data-informed recommendations to the state and to our block grant advisory board to address the lived experience gaps identified by the IRC. The third step in our process was for the state and the block grant advisory board to review and then accept or reject the recommendations, right? We have to have that in there because we can't, neither of these work groups, the RSW or the IRC, have the leverage to mandate any spending for the state, right? Like, that's got to happen through legislation, as you guys know. So we had it all in writing and through charters, and they were recommendations that MAPAC could accept or reject. So the recovery support work group, from 2012 to about 2019, they were trying to do statewide gap analysis too. And we're not going to talk too much about that because I want to focus more on what we did after. So in 2020, we contracted with the outside vendor to come in and look at our work groups, look at our memberships within the work groups, identify common ground, and figure out how we could leverage this and create a feedback loop to the state that was person-centered and that involved multiple state agencies, so that it wasn't just SAMHSA being expected to provide funding for these programs. So they came in and they cleaned everything up for us. So They standardized forms for our recovery support work group that included charters and charters for the subgroups. We created data set brief forms. We started looking at all of the existing recovery specific data. So anything that had to do with health, home, community, and purpose. We had the work group looking at that to see what we were collecting, what we're not collecting, and then use that to make recommendations on addressing gaps and needs for people for recovery support services across the state. So we had a whole process in place. The recovery support work group stakeholders, I think this is like our money shot. So we had more than 57 members. When I left in 2022, we had 57 members representing 26 different agencies. Not all of the agencies were state partners, but I would say at least half of them probably were. So we had the Indiana Housing Community Development Authority, we had Center for Supportive Housing, we had our office, the Division of Mental Health and Addiction, we had Medicaid attending our meetings, we had the Chamber of Commerce attending our meetings, the Indiana State Chamber of Commerce, Department of Workforce Development, we had Department of Corrections, we had Department of Education, like people, like we couldn't even believe, like once we started creating this space for these conversations, we really couldn't have foreseen what was going to happen from all of that. But what was really cool is that some really cool partnerships emerged. If I can get it to go, there we go. Oh, we're not there yet. I'll talk a little bit more about those partnerships in a second. So the Indiana Recovery Council was the consumer advisory board that was tasked with identifying needs. So they created this survey that was supposed to go out through all of our grassroots organizations. The first survey was only 19 questions deep. It was open for approximately 4 weeks just at the onset of COVID. And then we had 199 people respond to the survey. So wasn't a lot, but now we got, I think last year we had almost 800. Every year it grows by a couple hundred. So this was our first survey. It was only open 4 weeks. We did zero marketing. I was happy with 199 responses. What we found is that from the people who responded, 20% had a mental health lived experience, 50% had co-occurring, 18% of the people responded identified as having a substance use disorder, and then 11% of the folks who responded were family members. Some of the results that came out of this were very interesting. So when we asked them what's missing from their current daily lives related to SAMHSA's dimensions of recovery, health, home, community, and purpose, on the front end, it looked like purpose was the number one thing that the majority of people who responded were missing. But when we broke it down and started looking at it by other demographics, such as type of mental health or substance use, lived experience, when we broke it down by race, age, sex, all of these other things, we started seeing the disparities. So for example, for Black and African Americans, they rated home as being the number one thing that was missing at almost double white and Caucasian. So we could have very easily, as a state agency, thrown all of this money into purpose and helping people identify jobs and career pathways or whatever that it is that they needed related to purpose. And then we would have just completely not even paid attention to the equity here, to the equity matter here around housing. Of course, we didn't do that, but I'm just trying to make a point that like we had to dive into the data and what the needs were. The reason I really wanted to share this slide is because we also asked about barriers to treatment and recovery support services. So when we talk about some of the barriers that people identified, like childcare, transportation, housing, like funding for those type of initiatives have to come through unique partnerships, right? So as a state agency, I could look at this and say, okay, we need to get the Housing Community Development Authority over here because they need to see what our data is showing so that we can work on addressing the solution together. And so that's how a lot of our strategic partnerships started getting developed too, is through that grassroots survey. So here's the money shot. So when we put together this ROSC at the state, some of the very cool things that ended up transpiring out of that is that we had like the Bureau of Motor Vehicles allocated dollars to pay for mobile vans to visit recovery community organizations and offer IDs on the spot. So the peer-run recovery community organization would say, hey, this is so-and-so, they've been coming here this long, they don't have their ID, and the mobile van would take the word for it from the nonprofit and they would give them their IDs on the spot, which we didn't even know was possible until we started having these conversations. The Department of Natural Resources, as a solution to identifying, addressing the community need, and this idea of sober social events for people in substance use recovery, the DNR offered state park passes for families to start hosting events at the state parks. Like that's an idea that never crossed anybody's mind, right? Like we would have never thought about that, but guess who thought of it? DNR, because they came to a Recovery Support Work Group meeting and we were talking about the need for increasing access to community. The Indiana Housing Community Development Authority and the Center for Supportive Housing were coming to our meetings, and they ended up partnering with us on a grant to train all of our certified peers across the state on how to navigate the housing continuum. So then at least one housing expert so at least every peer-run recovery community organization in the state could have at least one housing peer expert on their staff if they wanted to, because we created this partnership with the 𝐻𝐫𝐝 to develop the training for us. And then they trained all of our peers that wanted to take the training. Another cool partnership, the Indiana Department of Corrections partnered with our Division of Mental Health and Addiction to start peer training and certification within the Department of Corrections. That's not so new anymore. I mean, we're seeing an increase of that happening across the country. Ohio is now training and certifying peers within their state correctional system, and it's the highest paid position within the state correctional system. So we're hearing anecdotally that it's literally transforming entire cultures within the Departments of Corrections in some states. So there's some really good positive feedback coming back from around the country as to the benefits of having peers certified and providing peer support within correctional settings. The last one here that I want to highlight is the Indiana Department of Health began to allocate some serious dollars to our peer-run organizations to start addressing the social determinants of recovery support needs. So we have the data, we could showcase that we have the need. We've obviously got the partners here, and the Department of Health ended up updating all of their policies on available vendors for their grants, and all of our peer-run organizations are approved to apply for Department of Health grants. And that is where a lot of our peer-run organizations are getting funding right now. And I think that's a national thing. Let me pause there. Let me go back and I'll pause here. Does anybody have any questions so far? Let's have some dialogue. I don't want to just keep talking at you guys forever, but if there are no questions right here, then I'm happy to keep going. I also don't like to keep talking at people. Go ahead, Elaine.
Hi, sorry, having trouble maneuvering my buttons here. Yes, this is all actually really exciting stuff. And I have to say, I am intrigued about these recovery cafes. I know we have like a little space in our ROC that is a recovery cafe, and that's, you know, a safe space for people to come get some coffee, whatnot. But that's kind of where it stops. And I'm wondering, now you got whole buildings for recovery cafes. I want to know, what is that? What's that look like? It's really exciting to me. If you could please tell me a little more.
Oh, I'm happy to. The recovery cafes, I tell people, are my babies, and I love our recovery cafes. So they are brick and mortar locations. So both of our first two recovery cafes that we piloted in our state, both own their own buildings now. And so it's not just about giving out coffee. It's literally like a ROSC within a community. So it's a brick and mortar location. It's a membership-based model, and it's for people with mental health and substance use. They operate under the premise that everybody's in recovery from something. Whatever you're coming in with, like, this is a safe space. Come on in, let's have coffee. Let's do life on life terms together. You're welcome to come in, use the computer, do your resume, talk to one of our peers, get access to housing community support that you need, whatever the community support service that you need. And what's happening is that a lot of the other community-based services are now coming to the cafe. So instead of us sending people to 20 different community service agencies to get the support they needed, we now have a brick and mortar location where those community service agencies are on site at various times throughout the week and able to provide services to the members. So I can't speak highly enough of our cafes. They're my baby, and I love our cafes. But for anybody that's interested, the Recovery Cafe Network is based out of Seattle, and that's where the first one started. they have the entire network. So there's a difference between the Recovery Cafe Seattle and then the Recovery Cafe Network. The Recovery Cafe Network provides free technical assistance to launch recovery cafes. So if you have any questions or you're interested in starting any, I would reach out to the Recovery Cafe Network and get a meeting. They'd be more than happy to schedule a meeting with you. They'd be more than happy to schedule a tour. I can't speak highly enough of the cafes. I love the cafes.
Oh, that's awesome. Thank you so much for that.
Yeah, and I'm happy to share it.
Also just hop in real quick. I put the link to the Recovery Cafe Network in the chat box, and also Shireen, y'all know Shireen. Shireen has a Recovery Cafe as well, so you can always ask her questions too.
Oh, wow. Thank you for this link too.
Thank you, Jesse. Any other dialogue? Any other questions or even comments or feedback? Okay, we can keep moving. All right. So my day job. So I'm trying to think of where to start. So my current day job of providing peer support to the state offices of recovery across the country, I work for an organization called the National Association of State Mental Health Program Directors. It's a big name. But within that organization, we have our Division of Recovery Support Services. So I'm the liaison to our National Division of Recovery Support Services. So all the state recovery leads overseeing peer recovery support services for their states get together on a monthly basis. And so as we've been getting together on the monthly basis and on other projects, a couple of years ago, we decided to do a survey to understand, we wanted to understand what was happening across the country related to recovery support services. So we sent out a survey. I've only pulled out one nugget from the survey because this is what I think applies to the topic of conversation today, but I'm happy to give you guys the link to the full survey. We asked a ton of questions in the survey. We had 19 states respond. We sent it to 44, I believe. And then 14 of the 18 states, and this was in 2021, I believe. So this is like, things have evolved so much since then. This is all the way back in 2021. 14 of the 18 states who responded to the survey, this particular question within the survey, said that they were focusing on criminal justice involved populations. 17 of the 19 states who responded indicated they focused on substance use disorder recovery supports, 19 focused on mental health recovery supports, and then 14 of the 19 state offices of recovery reportedly were focusing on homeless populations. That being said, some of the key takeaways that we found from the partners who responded is that 20 different, across the 19 state offices who responded, they reported 20 different types of recovery support services being funded, targeting 12 different types of specific populations with the funding, and then 12 diverse state agencies and systems were reportedly being involved in the implementation of recovery support services. So when you think about it, and this is across 8 different funding streams. So that's at least 12 different state agencies are involved in the implementation of recovery support services across the country, at least, and then that's across 8 diverse funding streams. And if you think back, this was in 2021. We've knocked this number out of the park. Like, this number is smashed, and we're working on updating the survey because this is so far outdated. But my point is, that's different funding that peer-run organizations could tap into, and those are different state agency partnerships that peer-run organizations can partner with. And then you guys have seen this already. I saw this in the other slide, but I still wanted to go ahead and make sure that we covered it. Is it too silly to have somebody volunteer to read this slide? I don't want to be talking at you guys forever. Does somebody want to help read the slide?
Sure, I'll read it for you. I'll even give you a video. Recovery-oriented system of care. What is ROSC? ROSC is a coordinated network of community-based services and supports that is person-centered and builds on strengths and resiliences of individuals, families, and communities to achieve abstinence and improve health, wellness, and quality of life for those with or at risk of alcohol and drug problems.
So you guys have talked about this before. Did somebody want to volunteer to share what you've talked about, what you remember from the conversation, or what you know about ROSC? What does ROSC look like in Texas? If I was to come up to your organization and ask if there's a ROSC in Texas and what it looks like, how would you explain it? And listen, folks, I'm good with silence.
I have to be honest about what I remember about this conversation. And so this might not be the best thing, but I remember hearing how much more outstanding Houston's was compared to Austin. I know in Austin, and granted, I have not been to a ROSC at all this year. So these things might have changed, but the last time I've been, it's been more about treatment centers and coming in and presenting, that kind of thing. So here in Austin, that's what I've been seeing. And honestly, with all that, it made it not something important for me to go to. Yeah, I know where those treatment centers are and that kind of thing. Sure, there might be some information I don't know, don't get me wrong, but I felt like here it was a bit of rehashing of some stuff we knew. In terms of what we were hearing in Houston, it seemed like they had more collaboration and stuff going on. But of course, I'm not part of the Houston ROSC, so I'm not going to speak on that. But that's what I got from it, really.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing.
The Houston ROSC is comprised of stakeholders, community leaders, nonprofit, for-profit, schools, hospitals, local mental health authorities. It's comprised of such a large continuum of care that if anyone comes for any kind of services, that they could be detected upon. It doesn't matter which angle they're coming in for support from. Someone would be able to detect that individual and assist them. The platform is very, very great. It's comprised of many, many work groups and many, many opportunities. Like I say, the profit, nonprofit, mental health, prisons. It's really huge. It's really huge. They're doing it now virtually. But it's still, it's very important here, and it's very big. And it's a lot of networking, a lot of information sharing. It's come a long way since it started. But it's very important. I believe Regina is on it monthly now. But it's very important to attend your local ROSC because of the connections and the network, and you better conserve the people that you're serving in your area for mental health and substance use. A lot of great connections are made at the Houston ROSC, at the ROSC in Houston. It's huge.
Thank you for sharing about that.
Different work groups.
Regina, you go ahead. Yeah, Regina, you go first, and then.
No, I was just adding that, you know, they have a lot of different work groups as well, you know, like whatever work group you would like to join to contribute, you know, and get involved in for the community and, you know, networking and things of that nature. That's all I want to say.
Thank you, Regina. Go ahead, Chris.
Thanks. So, you know, one thing that I've heard a lot about, I live in El Paso, Texas, and we did a lot of work around building our ROSC up. When I came on as convener, it was deeply siloed. The only thing that we talked about at that ROSC was the Big Texas Rally. That's the thing that sucked up all the air in the room. And then it was a whole lot of different agencies doing presentations about their services. You know, ROSC is a lot more than a sales pitch. And so what we realized is that we had a lot of mid-level individuals that were at the table that were just trying to sell a program. And we needed not just leadership from different agencies at the table, the people that could make decisions on behalf of those agencies, but we needed peer voice and peer choice represented at the table too. So, you know, what we did was bring in a lot of not just stakeholders that were in the recovery community in terms of doing peer work, but we have people in the recovery community that are part of 12-step faith-based, smart recovery, refuge recovery. But we also have stakeholders that inform our gaps and services analysis and have seats at the table that are people with lived experience and living experience using drugs. One of the things that's highlighted in this definition is a pathway to abstinence. Abstinence is not the only way for a person to recover. And so harm reduction, we realized, had to be a big part of what we did in the El Paso area. We worked very hard at not just developing relationships, but one of the things that helped us was in finding agencies that were willing to collaborate to develop MOUs with each other and business agreements where they would go in on grants with each other. We started with a grant workshop or a funding workshop where we'd find agencies that could spearhead. We would work with them at developing the grant, developing the funding, and getting everybody. The philosophy here in El Paso has now become when one of us sits down to eat, everybody eats. We make sure that we have partnerships that are built into our contracts with each other. We also have MOUs that go deep with each other within the community. And when we started pulling money down from the feds and from the state government because of those collaborative proposals, we found that more and more people came to the table and wanted to play ball. And the entry level is we don't want mid-level management where you have to take things back up to your leadership to get approval. We need people that can make decisions on the spot. So that was key. We have CEOs and executive directors at the table at all of our ROSCs. We have peer membership, and they become vital. So a few of the things that came out of our work group wasn't just that. We have 15 different work groups that are extremely active. But we do a lot of public education. We do a lot of peer education and training through the ROSC, providing trainings for the peer workforce in the El Paso area. And we have a peer concentration work group where we get peers together to enhance their skills, to reorient themselves within the peerness of what they're doing. Also to conduct boots on the ground gaps and barriers analysis within our community to take back to these leaders and say, look, we need people to play a little bit nicer. This is something that we think we need at the table. This is also an agency we think would be beneficial to have membership. And then doing resource development within our community as well, which is a lot of doing inreach to those different agencies. It's an astounding project because, for one, our ROSC is entirely volunteer driven. We do not have full-time employees. It's comprised of individuals that have a passion to communicate and to do the work that needs to be doing to serve our community. And so we're not grant driven. We don't have grants that come down to fund the ROSC itself. But what we're really advocating for at the national level is SAMHSA is trying to reboot the ROSC. It's an initiative they're calling Bring ROSC Back. And one of the things we'd like to see is, rather than have SAMHSA deliver in a competitive facet a distribution of funding for grants, is to distribute block grants to different ROSCs in areas that are organized where they're able to vote as a community on the initiatives that matter to their community and how best to spend that money within their community. Rather than have the feds tell us this is what it needs to be spent on, we're able to make the decisions on the ground on how we want to spend that money. So we're doing a lot of advocacy around that right now.
I love it. I love it. No, it sounds like you're pretty well plugged in, Chris, because I know that SAMHSA is also working on ROSC 2.0. And so which for me, that just means updating the original ROSC toolkit. And with bringing it up to date, it's including mental health, but also the harm reduction and the trauma informed and all of that. So you're spot on. Yeah. Sounds like you guys are doing some really cool stuff. So I actually have a question for you, Chris. So you said that most of the people that run the ROSC are volunteers. How did you get that started? Like who was the lead? And then where did that leadership, where were they getting their support?
So I took the lead initially. I get voted. I can't get away from it now. I keep getting voted into a leadership position there. But the way we started actually was 4 very small organizations that were willing to collaborate. There had been a lot of bad blood and poisonous water that had gone under the bridge in the past between agencies. And 9 times out of 10, I will tell you that the problems of siloing is not an issue of competition. It's an issue of bad feelings between the leadership of 2 different agencies. And so what we did was utilize peers as the ambassadors in that. They started doing a lot of work with peers across gaps, across barriers, making connections with these different organizations, getting to people, know people by name, and then just say to them like, hey, why don't you guys come by, because we're working on this project. And at the time it was a funding project. And what we found is as people got to the table, they realized they had more in common and that they could gain more for the community by collaborating than by competing. And so what ended up happening was we said, we're not going to make this something that is full-time. People were advocating to have grants brought in or to pool resources to have a full-time employee run the ROSC. And we thought, you know what, if the passion's there, we're going to make it happen. And for the first 2 years, we got a lot done. And what we saw was more and more people coming to the table saying, you know what, I don't care what we have during our day. I will clear my schedule once a month to be at those meetings. Then we had people that were boots on the ground that started to do volunteer work to run work groups. If they were responsible for collecting the people to help them run those work groups. And our job, as a convener, my job became more about directing airline traffic and keeping them from running into each other than anything else. But it really took off, and that's because there was a lot of passion and belief in a shift from competition to collaboration. There had to be a basic cultural shift in our area away from thinking that, these people are sucking up all the funds and the money. And they're trying to do everything and become this one-stop shop, and really helping them recognize that we're better off collaborating, even if there are duplicated services. And this is something that I really harp on. People, you hear them talk about it, it needs to be unduplicated. It doesn't. If you have peer supports that have an MOU that are doing tandem work around one person, that are communicating and talking to each other, and there's a way to get around HIPAA and CFR 42 part 2, which is to simple consent, and you're able to put together a treatment team on the fly from 5 or 6 different agencies, why wouldn't you do that? Why wouldn't you do that? So that's really how we did it.
Mm-hmm. No, that's amazing, Chris. And I'm learning a lot just from what you're sharing. And some of it's things like we know, but then when we think about how it plays out in practice, right? Like that's always harder. And I'm going to get into it here in a few slides, but we've got some similar politics happening in my local community. And so I'm taking, you're helping me right now. So thank you for sharing all of that information. I feel like you guys have a pretty good handle on ROSC. I don't know that we need to necessarily read through all of this, but I just wanted to make sure that you guys knew that this is in here, and all of this language is going to be updated by the end of the year. So SAMHSA is working on a ROSC, a next level. I've heard it called so many things. Next level ROSC, ROSC 2.0. The point is that the ROSC toolkit is being updated, and it's going to include all of the recent updates from the last 12 years, and then also be inclusive of mental health. So we'll go ahead and skip these for now. You guys, it seems like you guys got this. So let's jump into the local perspective. So this is what I figured I would share. Have you guys done sequential intercept mapping across Texas at all? Okay. So then maybe this is something that's newer to you guys. So that makes me feel better for including it, because I was actually kind of worried that you guys are gonna be like, oh, we did that 10 years ago. Like, cause this is old stuff. Like, where'd you get this speaker at, Jesse? Okay, so the sequential intercept model mapping is it's a series. I don't want to say a series because it's really just one. It's a workshop that was developed by the Policy Research Associates, and it's known internationally for its work regarding individuals with behavioral health needs who are also involved in the criminal justice system. SIM model workshops are tailored to the specific community and designed to provide an opportunity to bring together key stakeholders to explore how behavioral health and the criminal justice systems intersect in serving that population. The SIM mapping workshops aim to assist with identification of resources, gaps in services, and opportunities for improvement, development of priorities for change with regard to systems transformation, improvement in service delivery, strategic action planning, optimizing use of local resources, and then furthering delivery of appropriate services. So if I had to re-say that in like a very summarized, watered down way, it's basically ROSC for the criminal justice system, right? So thinking about the Sequential Intercept model and how people who intersect with the criminal justice system across the 0 to 5 spectrum, this is a way for a community to sit down and map. This is where each of these intercepts with the criminal justice system happen in our community. Then we're going to look at the resources and what's available in each of these intersects. And then we're going to identify the gaps as a community. Like this is a ROSC, it's like a ROSC kind of, this is a community level engagement with the criminal justice sector and the system. So you're going to have, like for ours, we had the jail, we had the probation parole, we had public defender, we had the prosecutor wasn't there, but he got a lot of shame for not being there. Like all of the criminal justice partners were there, all of the behavioral health providers are there. And then we sit down together as a community and we look at the map across each intercept and we say, what do we have available for people being impacted by the criminal justice in this setting? What do we have for people in this setting? What do we have for people in that setting? Go ahead, Chris.
Sorry, I forgot to put my hand down.
Oh, it's okay. It's okay. So a little bit more language from the actual SIM mapping. It's meaningful cross-system collaboration. Meaningful cross-system collaboration is required in order to establish effective and efficient services for people with behavioral health needs in the criminal justice system. This workshop is unlike other types of consultations or staff development trainings. The Indiana SIM mapping facilitators serve as expert guides, helping the group to develop a plan for their community. This makes the composition of the group extremely important. While some workshops involve advertising to the entire provider community, it is essential that the organizers gather a group that represents key decision makers from the relevant provider systems and varied levels of staff. So even as I say that, I can tell you that they have the SIM mapping training gives a very clear list of partners who should be involved in this. And it does include people with direct lived experience and people in recovery. And so it's all there. It's all there. That and the criminal justice partners. This is Intercept 0 through 5. So basically, I just went through this a couple of weeks ago. So that's why I'm so easily able to speak to it. So basically what we did is we had about 40 of our community partners there, including everybody from the criminal justice sector, except for the prosecutor. And they put this up on a screen, and then we just had dialogue between us. What services are available within Intercept 0? What services are available within law enforcement? And then we even took it a step further and said, what peer support is offered within each of these intercepts? Like we had this very deep dive conversation, and I'll tell you, I heard it over and over and over again throughout the entire training and the mapping process. People just kept saying, I had no idea we had all that. Like, and this is just a community. This is just one local community. And we didn't know that this organization was working on that and this organization was working on this. And don't get me wrong, it wasn't all fluffy puppies and rainbows. Like, I was very much picking up on the politics behind the scene. Like, you know, this person would start talking and then that group would roll their eyes, and then that group would start talking and then this person would grab their phone. And like, there was a lot of undercurrent of like bad blood, I guess. But to Chris's point, everybody came together for the greater good because they realized that this is to help the people that we're all trying to serve. And so people over the 2 days, each organization started opening up more and more. Now, that being said, we were able to develop a, not necessarily a strategic plan, but we did put together an action plan, and we identified specific priorities that we discussed as a group. So day one, we look at all the intercepts, we identify all the gaps and needs and what we're good at. Day 2, the facilitators of the training took back all of our feedback and put them up on a board. The next morning, we all agreed or disagreed that everything that we noted that we need to do, an action plan and priorities and objectives was on there. And then they give everybody stickers, and we as a community vote on what's most important to us. And then that's how they kind of dwindled it down to the top 5 priorities for our community related to the criminal justice system and people with behavioral health issues are these 5 things. And then the rest of the conversation from there turns into how do we actionize these things, right? So how do we do these things as a community? And so from that, I'm super excited because, I just explained all this. So this was an example of the agenda from day 1, where we established the priorities and wrap up. I probably should just change my slide, but, and then this is the day 2 where we action plan, finalizing the action plan. So all of it gets discussed and we do it all as a group and everybody votes and then we finalize it. Here's a list of who's on your invite list. So these are just examples I just wanted to share with you guys because I really didn't know where folks were coming in, like how much your knowledge base was with this, but they give examples here. So there's a list of everybody that should be involved. And then I'm excited to report that for our community, my local community, this was just 2 months ago, our priority number 3 area that everybody voted on was reduce the fragmentation of peer services. And so we talked about the following objectives and then those actions behind that I didn't put all in here, but develop a peer network, work towards an open access, person-centered approach to peer services across the Intercept, develop scope of practices for each group of peers because we have several different groups of peers within our county right now, and then develop a best practice plan. So we are independently working on this. Like there's a different group of people assigned to each of these based on who wanted to be involved in it, right? And so out of that, I've had my own ideas of things that I have hoped to do, but so this happened, I want to say maybe 2 months ago, we did this. And what we're doing now is we have our very first meeting as a group to talk about the solutions and to start actionizing these steps. We have that first meeting next week. So what happened is 2 or 3 weeks ago, the state issued a new grant. They issued a new notice of funding opportunity, and it's to expand the peer workforce. So of course, everybody in our community is going to be scrambling for this grant, right? And so I'm standing here like, wait, guys, please, let's talk about this. Like, let's be reasonable. Let's remember what we just talked about, and let's do something together. But I couldn't quite figure out in my head what it would be, how it would look, how it would all play out. And so I've had a couple of sidebar conversations with a couple of the other peer organizations. And I had a call yesterday, and you're not going to probably be able to see it on here, but I'm happy to share it with you. So I was on a call yesterday, and the peer organization's executive director was telling me that she's been thinking about the need for us to de-silo too. And she was talking about one way to do this is that right now we have several different groups of peers that are at work release every week, right? And we have several different groups of peers from different organizations that are trying to get into the jail. And we have several different groups and peers that are providing services at the cafe. And then we've got different groups of peers that are providing service at the peer respite. So we've got all of these like siloed things. She said, what we've been doing is we've been picking up people from work release and taking them to, it keeps recognizing my thumb. I'm sorry, I'm not, did you see it? Does it do anything? Because I see it on my end, it's weird. Okay, so she was saying that basically that this last year they have picked up people from work release to volunteer and do service work for events several times throughout the year. And every time they do, the people are like, please, anything that you need to do, I just want to get out, like, come get us, we'll do it. And she said, if there was a way we could court, and I said, oh my gosh, she's reading my mind, because literally I've been thinking and saying the exact same thing. And so what's happening is work release is getting the same thing happening for all of the organizations. Oh, we're hosting this event, can we come pick people up? And guess what? When they pick the people up, they're saying the same thing. Hey, come get us. What else do you have? Can I come tomorrow? Do you guys have anything going on this weekend? Like, they just want to get out of work release. So we put together this brainchild of like, okay, let's create a partnership and this is where this is so timely. And I'm telling Jesse, like, this is perfect timing for things I'm working on, because it's helping me, like, not just talk the talk, but walk the walk. Because there's some organizations that I too do not want to, like, but this isn't about Amy. This isn't about Amy's organization. This isn't about the other organization. This is about what does the community need. And so we need to work together. So basically what I'm proposing to the group this week, and I've developed this MOU as an example, and I mixed it up on the screen, but I'm happy to share the actual document with you too. I created this MOU of basically a volunteer program where one peer, and we pay for the peer for each organization out of this grant. So it's going to be a collaborative grant, and we're all going to have at least one peer that works on this project. And what they do is every month, every other week, they get together and they meet and they identify what events are coming up next month that we can pick people up from work release. And then we'll provide peer support while we're taking them to the place and while we're there and on the way back, and then develop these kind of natural relationships with people who are in the criminal justice system. So that's kind of the big picture model, but ideally this state grant would give us funding for one peer for each organization that wants to partner, but we would need MOUs with each of the organizations, because right now there's some serious fragments and there's some serious divides between at least two of these organizations, because there's some historical bad blood and some things that are happening recently. They're not even talking to each other right now. And so this is a way to hopefully bring everybody to the table, kind of leaving executive leadership behind, but the peers are bridging that. And it's not about the organization, it's about the end user. And the end user is people sitting at work release with nothing to do and nowhere to go, and the peers that come in randomly when they're able to, and then that's it. So this is a way to kind of hopefully build some bridges. So this has been a great learning experience. I'm super excited about that, if you can't tell. I haven't even pitched it to work release yet. So if you pray, say a prayer for me, because that meeting's tomorrow. I think she's going to love it. She's probably going to say, well, I want a peer too. And I'll be like, okay, we'll throw you a peer in there, and you can, because it all hinges on work release. So we need their buy-in. So we'll throw a peer in for them, and they can lead the meetings. I don't care. All right. So I actually, through the MOU section, should we stop and chat? Do you guys have anything, any questions or examples or thoughts or ideas on anything I've shared? Yeah, quiet.
I do.
Go ahead.
And maybe this is too precise of a point, but I'm very curious. How did you get work release involved? Is that like through the state that you went through? I'm not sure like who the work release people themselves are where they're coming from.
County. Yeah, so Tippecanoe County work release, or I'm sorry, Tippecanoe County Community Corrections oversees the work release facility, the house arrest, the day reporting, and all of that. So it's community corrections, and we've even got them approved. They just put in for a grant they got that they're hiring 2 peers as well, which adds to the disfragmentation that we just talked about. Is like peers are like the it thing right now. Like we all know that. Everybody thinks that they need one, and I'm like, what's happening, you guys? Like the peer is supposed to be a trusted relationship. And if I have a peer when I'm at this building, and I have a peer when I'm at that building, and I have a peer when I'm at this building, to Chris's point, there's nothing wrong with having multiple people on a team. But I feel like for some people, that's overkill. And they really do, like me, and when I think back to my early days in recovery, I didn't even want the one person I had. Like, give me a break, guys. You know, so like, well, when do we get back to, person-centered care, even within peer support, right? So in my head, creating ways where people have an option, like there's all these peers and they're all together at this setting. Who do you relate to the most? Who are you connected with? Who is the one that's helping you with where you want to be and be the person that you want to be the most? And then building those natural connections that way, versus you can only have this peer when you're here and you can only have that peer when you're there. Like we have to get back to basics, in my opinion.
Thank you so much.
Sorry, I went on a tangent.
No, it's okay.
Bye, Chris.
Oh yeah, I was just gonna say, I think, and to your point, like I think what people hear when they hear duplicated services, that they hear that like when you come in our doors, we're responsible for you. You can only work with our people, and that's that. The power of an MOU, and really what it boils to, like what we found is MOUs can be as simple or as deep as you need them to be, right? And what like in our experience doing work with the unhomed neighbors that we have in our area, one person isn't enough, right? It just wasn't enough maintaining that contact because they're itinerant, they end up in the wind. You may not be out on the streets when they're out on the streets. And so having
Right.
those kinds of services available through multiple agencies, the power of an MOU allows those agencies to communicate with each other in ways that if you didn't have the MOU in place or you didn't have a consent in place, you can even confirm that that person was with you for services. So having those MOUs in place actually allow you to communicate, like with our peers, to communicate with another outreach agency, drop-in centers, being like, hey, have you heard from this person? Or have you spoken to this person? Oh yeah, I ran into them yesterday. You know where they moved their camp? Because in Texas, we sweep camps all the time, right? And that's part of the problem of keeping track of individuals, is that their camps are swept up. They have to recollect all their stuff and then they move. So there are, I think it's context dependent on the one hand, but your MOU, like I said, can be shaped to be as deep or as specific or as broad as you want it to be. The key, I think, for any MOU is asking yourself, why are you developing it? And what are you going to do with it? So how are you going to serve your community together? In other words, you establish a mini mission and a mini vision for what that MOU wants, what you want to achieve with that MOU.
That's good, Chris. Thank you for sharing. You're definitely an expert here. Any other thoughts or questions or discussion? So I threw this in here because I saw it on the feedback that you guys gave, that there was some interest in more understanding around MOUs. So Chris, you're so good at this. Do you mind just reading and maybe if you have expertise on the topic, feel free to share.
Yeah, I don't mind reading it all. Thank you. And I'm sorry I'm talking so much. This is something I'm really passionate about. So
I'm so glad you're talking. Do not apologize.
yeah, thank you. So memorandums of understanding, or MOUs, are essential tools for formalizing partnerships between peer-run community organizations and other entities. These agreements outline the roles, the responsibilities, and the expectations of each party, ensuring clarity and mutual understanding. Steps to drafting an MOU include: 1, identify the potential partners; 2, initial engagement; 3, define partnership objectives; 4, drafting the MOU or draft it; 5, review and revise; 6, finalize; and 7, sign. So I tend to think of agencies in a lot of ways as we tend to be kind of pack and clannish oriented just by nature of being human. And sometimes we have to recognize that we have to allow not just the individuals that are part of different agencies to get to know each other, but the agencies have to get to know each other too. So identifying partners, like what is available out in our community of being provided for the people we serve that we are not already providing, right? Like looking at where we have a contrast with another agency, and then reaching out to them and developing a relationship. Sometimes that starts with exploratory discussions, just like, hey, do you have 40 minutes to meet with me over Zoom, just so that we can talk about what we're doing and maybe spitball, let's throw some spaghetti at the wall and see how we might be able to partner up. And out of those discussions, we're able to define some objectives about what we both want to attain and how we can help each other attain that. So that's where the collaboration comes in. It's not just me taking from another agency, it's me offering things up for that agency as well. This is what I'm able to put on the table for you guys. This is what I want to offer to be able to help. And then drafting that MOU. Language with MOUs can be pretty important. You want to make them as specific or as broad, as I said, as you want. And then you can refine to sending that draft back and forth about expectations that you have of each other, maybe some timelines of when you'd like to see things rolled out. And then review those drafts, revise them, and then finalize them, get them signed. Who's signing your documents, like for your agency, on behalf of your agency? Your signatory power should be included in that discussion around what the objectives are going to be for your agency and what the objectives are going to be for that other person. And then finalize and sign it. Once you guys sign off on it, you can go for it.
Keep going, Chris.
So the purpose and scope, clearly state the purpose of the MOU and the scope of the collaboration. How deep are you going to take it and what are you going to cover? Right. It can be an MOU with a drop-in center. Maybe you're running an RCO that does recovery residence and you have a drop-in center, and you might be able to benefit some of the people that are going into that drop-in center with providing them some housing and some recovery support. Or maybe it's MAT friendly housing, because some of that's not present in different communities. Maybe you're able to provide housing for people that are on MAT. Roles and responsibilities. So what is the role each agency performs? In other words, like, what do you all do? And then what are the responsibilities under the MOU that you all are each going to do respectively? So specify the resources, specify the finances, or maybe the personnel that are going to be involved. How many personnel do you want to devote to that project? And then also talk about maybe resources. That's something else that we talk a lot about, is the resources that we can also leverage that maybe aren't necessarily part of our organization, but we have existing partnerships and MOUs that we can leverage in what we're doing. And that expands the collaboration between just two agencies. Now you're able to leverage and bring in others to help the agency out that you're partnering with. How are you guys going to communicate? Email tends to be really inefficient, in my opinion. Either, Zoom meetings, face-to-face meetings tend to be a lot better, as long as you're taking adequate notes, because I've been in meetings where it's been over Zoom or over the phone, and you have great discussions and you come up with stuff, and then neither of you remember what you talked about. So making sure that you have somebody there that's taking adequate notes, right? And is, I guess, collating everything, including the frequency of the meetings. How often are you all going to meet? And then reporting mechanisms. That may change. Your frequency may change. Like with some partnering agencies, I've met with them once a week up until we got things up and running. We did some troubleshooting, and then we went to once a month, and now it's like every 6 weeks for some of them. The programs just really do well together. Duration and termination. So how long is the MOU going to last? And when do you want it to be terminated? Some partnerships can be short-term. I prefer to establish long-term partnerships, and we usually have a clause in there when we both mutually agree that our partnership's ended, then it's ended. That means there's no timeline, right? Like, you can partner for as long as you want. Dispute resolution, how you're going to handle, like if there's a problem between the agencies, how those disputes are going to be handled. That's good to frontline, because you're establishing boundaries with the other agency from the very beginning. It's all in writing, and everybody knows where they stand before they go into the partnership. And then who's signing? Identify the individuals who are signing the MOU on behalf of each organization. Any agency should have a signatory agent, somebody that has the authority to put their signature on the line, and that signs the whole agency up on their behalf. So they do a lot of that for grants. That's the person that should be signing these.
Spot on. Chris, you are so good for being put on the spot. So he covered everything that I would have said and more, actually. So we're so glad that you're here, Chris. The only thing that I want to add to this part of the conversation is the use of AI. So I feel like, I don't know if your organization is using it or not, but it's a great resource. And so like I said, I had a conversation with one of the other peer organizations yesterday, and she was telling me about her vision for work release in this volunteer program that's led by peers from all the agencies. And I'm like, oh, well, let me think about that. And I was like, well, let me come up with something and I'll send an email. Well, then I just throw in the AI what my vision is. And I said, draft me an MOU, and voila, I have an MOU, right? And so just providing the right context. And then of course you can't just take anything that AI says at face value. You need to check it, you need to verify it, and then you need to, you know, at least for me anyways, everything that I've gotten from there, I've had to massage into what I'm actually looking for, because it's not perfect. But I mean, it's simple, right? So I can't underscore enough the value of AI if you're not using it yet. It's a great tool. And so, and I do mean a tool, like it's not the answer. I wouldn't take, you know, I wouldn't just copy paste everything that it says and just move forward with that. Like there needs to be, like, you're going to need eyes on it and you're going to need to make it personal, but it's a great tool for even developing an MOU. Any other thoughts or comments? I agree, Chris. It's been a game changer for me. It saves so much time. So I feel like we just kind of covered this. I actually pulled this from AI, and I've got a Word document of this that I'll send over to Jessie, and she can share it with you guys too. So there's just some more. So this was the conclusion of that part of the presentation. So in conclusion, following these strategies and steps, peer-run community organizations can develop effective MOUs that provide a solid foundation for successful and sustainable partnerships. These agreements not only formalize collaborations, but also enhance mutual understanding, ensuring that all parties work together harmoniously towards common goals. And the one thing that I would add is that states love to see collaboration. So when I worked in state government and we would get proposals from organizations, like them having letters of support is great, but like I know how easy it is for groups to write letters of support, right? Like a letter of support is different than an MOU. So it's just it's favorable to the funders when you have MOUs in place, because it shows team effort, it shows collaboration, and it shows that there's some accountability even, right? So not to say that you have to have it to get a state grant, because it's not that's not the case whatsoever, but funders look on that favorably. So if you can create those kinds of partnerships, I strongly encourage it. A couple of SAMHSA federal considerations. You guys probably already know all this stuff, but the National Recovery Agenda goals, they talk about inclusion. They talk about equity. So the feds are no different. They want to see collaboration. So, and there's a whole effort happening right now. I don't know if you guys have heard of SPARK yet, but SAMHSA's programs to advance recovery knowledge, which is the National TA Center for Recovery that is in its base year through, funded by SAMHSA's Office of Recovery. They, where was I going with that? They have one of the line items in their contract with SAMHSA's Office of Recovery is to create interagency dialogue. And so there's a whole effort happening at SAMHSA right now to bring local, state, and federal governments together on issues related to recovery. Why? Because we are stronger together. So there's some serious effort happening from the top down on building relationships and collaboration. So feds are no different. The 2023 to 2026 SAMHSA strategic plan was just released, I believe, recently. The plan presents a new person-centered mission and vision, highlighting key guiding principles and presenting new priority areas. So if you are not an agency that provides services in any of these priority areas, partner with one that does, because there's definitely going to be something that you have that they don't have. So, I can't underscore that enough, that like we talked about at the beginning of the call, get comfortable being uncomfortable, right? So sometimes those end up being the best relationships. So the work is guided by SAMHSA's work is guided by 4 core principles that are being integrated throughout the agency. The core principles include equity, trauma-informed approaches, recovery, and commitment to data and evidence. And I can't underscore enough that, I mean, a core principle of recovery is that we do things together, right? So mutual, you know, we need to be walking by examples. So I wanted to kind of stop on this slide and talk a little bit. I didn't have time to build out these slides, but I feel like it was fine what we did cover, but I wanted to just chat about this. So when we think about the future, when we think about the existing recovery infrastructure and the direction that we're going, I think it was last week or the week before, SAMHSA released the new suicide prevention strategy, the 5-year strategy, I think it is too. And so I don't know if you had a chance to look, it's a 85-page document. So I don't know if you had a chance to do it, but I couldn't sleep the other night. So I was just kind of like flicking through and just trying to pick up and glean like what direction they're going. And I was struck by the fact that all of the different federal agency partners that they had listed that actually had goals that they want to implement between now and 2028, I believe it was. I don't even remember when it ended, but it was interesting because like the CDC had some goals, and like all of these federal partnerships that I would have never thought are in the suicide prevention lane have goals on the suicide prevention plan. And I was like, I started thinking about the CDC and how they've started getting behind the harm reduction and, you know, making it a public health issue, right? I think that suicide prevention is kind of going that direction now as well, which is only going to yet again increase our availability of partnerships with these agencies, right? So as different federal agencies start getting more into this space, the peer-run organizations, like we're primed and ready to step into that space and help with educating and get funding to address social determinants of recovery, for example, right? And start getting into these spaces where nobody's really at within the behavioral health space yet. So there's a lot of really interesting things happening. So the other thought I had too was CCBHC. So the Certified Community Behavioral Health Clinics, they are now, well, if they're a CCBHC, they're required to provide peer support and crisis services. Any crisis service provider is required to address recovery needs. So where do the peer recovery supports and organizations fit in both of those spaces, right? Largely untapped territory right now. But when we talk about MOUs and we talk about partnerships, we need to think outside of our normal. In my opinion, I think we should be thinking outside of our normal what's comfortable. Like, we don't have to go to the same state agency for funding all the time. We don't have to partner with the same agencies for funding all the time. Like Medicare approving peer support services now. We can go work in primary care now, right? Like the doors and the possibilities are endless. So I think collectively as a recovery movement, I think, you know, we could benefit a lot from being strategic and getting outside of our comfort zone right now more than ever before. And I'm going to shut up and open the floor. Thoughts, ideas, responses, agreement, you hate it.
I think it's a great idea. I think something that we've been discussing is actually really working at a state level of fielding peer supports that would help support 988 in different regions. So if a call came in, you know, you'd have a peer support that could be dispatched into ERs. They could be dispatched to home visits. They could do follow-ups for people that signed up with that. That is a wonderful thing. And we have the infrastructure to provide the supervision. We have RCOs that are in most of those communities that can provide supervision to those peers and to help them succeed at doing the work. I think it's a wonderful idea. In Texas, because we haven't expanded Medicaid, our Medicaid billing rates are really dismal. Jesse asked in the chat about what we could do. You could feasibly contract with your local LMHA to do that work, and then they get to pay off all the administrative costs. I think Shireen
Right.
𝐏𝐫𝐞𝐬 had mentioned that a couple of
Yep.
times, and we talked about it in the face-to-face. So, you know, the only thing you have to do is the contracting is the fielding the workforce, which is a lot of heavy lifting, and then have the LMHA share in that administrative burden.
That's right. And I think that that's the way of the future for our peer recovery community organizations, because we keep talking about sustainable funding, sustainable funding, sustainable funding. And largely, I think most of the peer recovery community is in agreement that we don't necessarily want to be Medicaid. We don't want to be Medicaid treatment providers. Like, that's not an end goal that we have, but we also want to have sustainable funding. So you're exactly right. How do we, this is my question to the peer recovery community. How do we address the need for sustainable funding and maintain recovery-oriented support and structure for our peers, right? Because my concern with the rollout of crisis services, and I'm already seeing it, the same thing with the CCBHCs, now that they're required to provide the peer support and addressing recovery needs, they're all just hiring their own peers. Well, there's no proper supervision. The work environment is still as toxic as ever. They're being put into more and more extremely intenseful, traumatic experiences at the workplace with little to no support. Their supervisor is not a peer. And it's like the list goes on, right? And so I think peer-run organizations are in the prime position to maintain support of the peer and partnering with those organizations. So the peer goes in to provide support, but then comes back to get the support that they need. Because the mantra right now in the national, and I think Jesse would agree, the mantra right now that I'm hearing across the country is that who's providing peer support to the peer support providers? Go ahead, Chris.
We did a lot of TA work locally when we had agencies that wanted to hire peers. And one of the things that we insisted on in our community was that they needed to partner with local RCOs to do cultural adjustments inside of their agency in order to hire peers to begin with. And part of that meant that we needed to bring them up to basic CAPRA standards for rolling out peer services. Most of these agencies that are hiring peers, they have peers that have never done a day's work people never done a day's work as a peer supervising these individuals. They're misusing the peers in terms of how they're supposed to work and with the roles that they're supposed to assume within the agency itself. They don't know what peer support is. They just don't know. And so RCOs, especially in extant communities, are uniquely outfitted to do technical assistance work, not just in providing a home base for those peers to be centered out of and to work from, but to do TA work with the agencies that want to hire them on to prepare those agencies for actually having a peer on staff. And that is a cost-oriented service. They need to be paying for that. They need to pony up the money to pay the RCOs to make sure that they get those services in play. The second thing is I don't think agencies should be hiring peers unless they're on track to be credentialed to have peers in those agencies. In other words, that there needs to be a certifying body at the national level that is certifying agencies for hiring peers to begin with. That's just my opinion, but I know a lot of states are headed in that direction, at least with CAPRAs, in achieving those standards. But I think there needs to be a little more in-depth work, especially with agencies like CCBHCs, LMHAs. Certain LMHAs in Texas are not equipped to handle peers, mental health, or substance use disorders. And the second thing is that on one side, if you want to establish smaller revenue streams through billing, for instance, you have to have a clinician supervising peers. But peer work and clinical work are not the same thing. They're very different. They're very different. And so that's a discussion. I mean, there's a whole rabbit hole. We could chase squirrels down that way all day long. But my main point is that RCOs need to be empowered to provide that TA work to different agencies. And if they're government funded, they need to sideline in their budgets contracts for RCOs to provide that TA work for them to prepare
That's a
for
great idea.
peers to be onboarded.
It's a great idea. Elaine, before we go to you, Jesse, I want to check in. Do you want to respond? Because I've seen some things in the chat too. So do you mind just like weighing in on some of that?
Yeah, I am working to drop something in the chat. Here we are. So I mentioned not anymore on the clinician supervising peers, which is super exciting. CMS, I believe it was CMS, put out a new FAQ document just a couple weeks ago saying that no longer should it be interpreted from that 2007 letter that it has to be a clinician supervising peers, that experienced peer specialists can supervise peers as well. And so I just dropped that letter in the chat if you wanted to open it up and take a look at it. I also have another resource that can give you a summary of it. But when we're looking at different ways of existing in the workforce, having peer supervising peers is obviously best practice. I was always that peer supporter, hired into a large organization that was the first peer and the only peer, and I will always advocate for peer-run organizations being the people to contract with larger organizations like LMHAs or primary care settings or even psychiatric hospitals. I worked as a psychiatric in a psychiatric hospital as a peer specialist, as y'all have heard me talk about. I will always advocate for peer specialists to be coming from peer-run organizations and RCOs going into these places rather than being employed by those places in and of themselves. It helps with the mutuality aspect, but also it creates that partnership that we've been talking about the entire time.
Thank you, Jesse. Elaine?
Hi. What I'm going to say is no way near in depth as some of these, and I really appreciate this conversation. There's some good stuff here. I want to say something new we're trying, and I'm actually quite excited about it. We're offering core training to partner agencies so they know what the hell a peer work is and quit trying to ask us to do other things, and and really just kind of get a gist of what's happening. One of the partners that I work with, they just hired like 8 new case managers, and it's not a very big organizations, but you can see like case managers don't know what we do. There's like all this overlap. I have case managers like coming to me telling me what I need to do and people I should go seek out because they think they have a drug problem or something. So I'm really excited that just at least to provide the core training, people can see what we're doing, and this particular organization I'm talking about, I can see them moving into a direction of them eventually hiring their own peers. So it's another reason why I'm excited that they at least see what that is, that it's not just willy-nilly. Like, yeah, that will break my heart if I'm no longer there, but again, it's not about me. It's about the most that they can get. And that particular thing, I just think it's kind of a start, really. Like, if we could just educate them, this would be no cost to them. And that's pretty good. So I just want to add that.
Yeah, that's really good, Elaine. Sorry, I just started reading Jesse's chat. Oh, okay. So you guys have to take a core training first. Oh yeah, I knew that. And I think I heard about the 3-day update from Noah. No, that's a good idea for the training, like innovative ways of training others. The other thought I just had two thoughts. One is CCBHCs, for example, they have to provide peer support now. but they've also been encouraged by National Council to designate RCOs as a DCO. It's DCO, designated community organization, I think is what it's called. And so they can contract, or let me put it this way, certified community behavioral health clinics can contract with peer-run organizations to be the provider of that peer support. But what's largely not happening is that. Instead, because there's funding available all of a sudden, now they want to hire their own. So go ahead, Chris.
I just mentioned this in the chat, but it's a good opportunity for the ROSC as well to set up a work group that does agency inreach and training for agencies and assessment, right? Like your ROSC being comprised, if you do have really great peer representation on your ROSC, it's a great opportunity to do familiarization and resourcing for workforce for those agencies. So while they may have funding, it's just to say, why don't you contract with this agency to have them roll out peer services where you are? Have the RCO do that. It's a great opportunity in a lot of ways in structuring your workforce and maintaining fidelity to the role. The problem, as I see it a lot of times, is when you have agencies that have no understanding of peer workforce, they don't understand what peers do, is it waters down the role, and it actually hurts the whole workforce, not just within the state, but nationally. It hurts everybody.
Right. Thank you, Chris. So we've covered CCBHCs. We've talked about crisis service providers. What am I missing? So I feel like there's a lot of stuff happening in the behavioral health space right now. So is anything missing from this list in terms of peer-run organizations?
I think behavioral health follow-ups from acute care stays, right? Like that's at least in our area, that's something that we miss. Is like if you have somebody that is in an acute care setting, maybe from a behavioral health standpoint, or maybe they've landed in an emergency room. In many emergency rooms with suicide attempts, people are approached by a social worker, and there's follow-up with those individuals following that. In some cases, for a mental health, maybe somebody has a mental health return of symptoms where they're in an acute care setting, or you have somebody that has an SUD crisis. We do have them in different areas, but that's some areas that we could look into, is rolling out those services, not just in the ER for a single encounter, but in maybe asking people, is it okay if we line something up so that I can check on you next week? And then for that continuing care moving forward for the long term, because that's really where the power of peer support is not in those OBEs or office-based encounters. It happens over the long term.
Yep, you're so spot on, Chris. It was like literally everything that you say. Seriously, you're just spot on. Follow up. Go ahead, Jesse.
I just wanted to mention that Texas currently does not have a single organization or collaborative that represents the peer workforce on the state level. And so I think that is something that could be added into the future possibilities as well.
Yeah, we used to have one, the Texas Recovery Initiative, but they stopped meeting. Yeah, sorry, Jesse. I didn't mean to step on you.
It's okay. I know that they used to exist, and I know that there's a current couple of initiatives with different organizations working to create more organizational collaboratives or representation, but there's not one cohesive group. And even those couple of initiatives, they're still growing. How can y'all partner together to make something work?
I know that there are talks right now in Tarrant County about doing the same thing out in Fort Worth. And I've talked to people like Amelia down in Houston is really on board with it. So the will is there. It's just getting people organized enough to pull it off. And I know that the TRI was deeply connected with with HHS. So we did a lot of feedback for HHS at that time. And I know that there's it's a peer workforce meeting that they have, but it's nowhere near the involvement that the Texas Recovery Initiative actually had. Because it was not just about developing some standards for peer work throughout Texas, but also ensuring that we were setting up work groups that were able to manifest in a supportive fashion for peer supports. That maybe you had somebody that was working in a situation like you were, Jesse, where there was some feedback mechanism to the TRI where they could be like, why are you allowing this, to HHSC being like, why are you allowing this? This is an HHSC funded program that's misusing a peer right now. So there was an accountability structure for people that were recipients of funds as well. And that's kind of, since COVID, has fallen off the radar.
So what do you think has to happen to bring that back up?
Well, one is we need to have a convention that is geared specifically to that. We need to, and it's not agency driven. We need to convene Texas peers, either virtually or in regions where we are talking about convening, like creating something like that, what it would look like, how it needs to be structured, and then motivating people to participate in it. The second thing is, how are you going to run an agency? So how are you going to define membership? How are you, all of those things have to be worked out. But there's so many people in Texas, and it's so big. The only thing I could think of is by breaking it up by region, and then having regional peers meeting to develop feedback mechanisms to a committee that runs at the state level, so that they're able to work through all that stuff and then feed it back to the groups.
Mm-hmm. Sounds interesting. I'm wondering, Jesse, if that's something that, I don't know, like what all you have the bandwidth to do within the organization that you work for, or even if it's like a funding thing, that you could get some funding just to spearhead a project around that. But you have to keep me posted on where this goes.
Yeah, so part of COGA, this program is bringing people together and supporting the alumni of the Leadership Fellows Academy programs that had happened. We had 2 different cohorts, essentially helping to support conversation and letting the workforce do that. Since we're a university, we really don't want to be the ones controlling or pulling the strings. We want the workforce to be that. But having this program where it's focused on organizational capacity growth and supporting the alumni and meeting together and networking sessions between the alumni and this cohort is something that's been a big focus this year.
I'm excited for you guys. So we're nearing the end here. This slide is about sharing strategies on how to use partnerships to secure funding. We've kind of covered, I think, the majority of this, but just here's a slide in here that you guys have as a resource if you want to reflect back on it. This was one of the, I actually threw this, I'm sorry, Jesse. I actually threw this slide in because this was one of the things that we were tasked with. What are the best practices and traps to avoid? So I, again, asked AI specifically for peer-run organizations, and what are the best practices for developing relationships and what are the traps to avoid? And this is what it came back with. So best practices, we've talked about pretty much all of this. Clear communication, shared goals, regular evaluation and feedback loops, so that communication is key. Formalizing partnerships with MOUs or agreements, case study, successful partnership practices and group discussions. Traps to avoid, misaligned goals or values, lack of clarity in roles and responsibilities, overdependence on a single partner, and then interactive discussion, sharing experiences and lessons learned, open forum. I don't know why that would be listed as a trap to avoid. I need to think about that one. But the one that really jumps out to me is this idea of avoiding misaligned goals or values. I would argue, like there's, like I said, and I've already been transparent about this. There's one specific organization locally that I'm like, I just don't want to partner with it because we have different values, like core values of like who we are so totally different. Like that's my instinct is like, no. But for the broader good, I'm not going to not partner with them if they want to partner because it's going to help the people that we're trying to serve. Right. So I keep going back and forth. But I definitely understand why that's on the traps to avoid. I think it just takes a lot of discernment and communication with other partners. Boundaries, absolutely, Jesse, absolutely. Being very clear in that MOU. So in closing, this is kind of the last slide here. This is a recap of what you guys put in, of what you wanted to know. So I had originally planned on just, if we got through the slide deck too quick, because I've never presented, I presented on all that content before, except for the MOUs, that was new stuff. And your guys' survey results. Other than that, I presented on all of that before, but just not in this way. So I wasn't sure time-wise how we were where we were going to land. So I had this here as a parking spot for us to just sit here and discuss if we got done too early. But we're kind of close. So you know, we could just stop sharing screen and just close out with folks' comments or last-minute thoughts. Or is there anything that you wish we had covered that we didn't, or something that you want to talk about in the last few minutes? It's been a great discussion too, guys, by the way. I've learned from you.
I have learned a lot, but there's something that was escaping me, and maybe it was said and I didn't grasp it. Always a possibility. And it was about when we were talking like a state-run agency for peers, like Chris, you mentioned the Recovery Coalition of Texas and those kind of things. I'm curious how that would be beneficial, mainly, like there's something in there I'm not getting, obviously, a little embarrassing, but I'm curious how that would be beneficial, what that kind of thing. Can you help me there? Please, if somebody could give me a little bit more on that, why that would be beneficial, and is that something we should be pushing to that is more active in our state?
So for one, because it's peer oriented, and not agency driven, right? Like it's peer membership, it's people that are doing the work. They're able to advocate as members of an entire field for changes in how agencies hire peers, for how the agencies that are doing the hiring are vetted, to even in terms of pay. Like, you know, one of the things that we talked about in the face-to-face, Elaine, is the fact we have peer recovery support workers. They want our experience in addiction and in recovery, right? But they're paying us the equivalent of what we could make running a register at McDonald's. So what does that tell you about how much they value your experience, right? All of that can be leveraged in showing, like, if you want us to work in your agency, at a minimum, for starters, peers should be paid at least $40,000 an hour. They should be a competitive wage that's a living wage where they're able to pay the rent, put roof over their head, and put some money away, right? Those are all things that agencies like that can do. They can all advocate for that kind of stuff. Maybe because we have and deal with so much trauma, is the idea of a 32-hour work week instead of a 40-hour work week. There's all sorts of stuff that when you have a group of individuals that are working together and advocating, they're all rowing in the same direction, by region, there's a lot of stuff that can be done. The other thing is you're able to, as a group, work with your local, county, and state government to change policies around how peers are treated. the ways that they are able to build, from quality development to establishing state standards for peer supports, right? Like all of that tends to be called from within HHSC, and and NOAA does a great job, but HHSC, by the way it's structured, is they'll say, this is how it's done. I remember when we were trying to get 1486 passed, there were tons of us testifying about the need for RCOs to be able to bill for Medicaid, right? And we got into there was a yelling match at one of those hearings, but because there was such disunity and people from different agencies, the peers weren't adequately represented, and they got shunted to the side, right? And they just said, nope, this is the way it's going to be, and it's in statutory language. So now we have to find an administrative remedy for it. The amount of power that you're able to generate with a group like that is huge. It's huge.
I'll
Well, I'm
add
curious,
on,
who legitimizes this, by the way?
the peers. I was just going to add on that being with the National Association of Peer Supporters, when I was on the board there, I recognized that obviously we didn't have every single voice of every single peer supporter in the country, right? That would be impossible. But what we did was we listened to the voices that were our members and that kept talking to us, even if they weren't members, but they were peer supporters. And we would take those voices and bring that to SAMHSA and other federal agencies when they reached out to us as the representatives of the workforce, because we were the national association. And so we got to be that in between. If you have a statewide version of that, then you get to have that voice where the peer workforce is deciding what's being told to the state, and the state has a place to go to ask those questions.
Yeah, and so you're able to talk to your local politicians, but you also have I'll give you an example from the harm reduction side. So in the last legislative session, Governor Abbott said, well, I put a bill in front of me that decriminalizes safe syringes and fentanyl testing strips, and I will sign it into law. That was held up in committee by one person. When you have a group of peers together that are rowing the same direction, they're all in the same policy piece, and they're all in agreement on it, you can put a whole lot of pressure on one of those representatives in that region, because it's not just the peers in the region doing the advocacy. You have peers all over Texas calling their office, writing letters, doing whatever they can do to get that legislation passed for peers. So there's a whole lot that can be done in terms of organizing advocacy with a little a, advocacy with a big A, advocacy for the recovery support peer field, as well as for RCOs.
So I wanted to check in with Amy. Did you have anything else you wanted to add on or say before we are, done?
No, just thank you guys. This has been a very enlightening conversation. I've learned so much, so thank you. And thank you for participating in the conversation, because I wouldn't have learned as much as I did, because this has been a great group.
Thank you, Amy.
And thank you, Jesse.
Yes, it's been wonderful having you.